Hello, welcome to ORMs and the DBA, How to Keep Both Happy. My name is Dan Mallott. I'm a principal for West Monroe. We are a business and technology consulting firm based out of Chicago, offices across the country. If you're interested in hearing more about West Monroe, what we do, who we are, any job opportunities, things like that, please feel free to hit me up afterwards. I'd be happy to talk through that outside the context of the session. All right, first up, this is PASS Summit. PASS is so much more than just Summit. I think that in this year we've kind of seen that there's more than one way to engage with PASS. So a lot of times traditionally we've looked at PASS as our one time a year to get involved, come together, see everybody, and we can't do that this year. And so I think it's important to point out that we have other ways to get involved with PASS. New for this year, there's the PASS Pro member. So this is exclusive training and networking that you unlock for an annual fee. In addition to supporting PASS, helping the organization do things like put on PASS Summit, this is a great opportunity to get access to some great training. In the free training realm, we have the PASS local groups. So this is local user groups around the world. There's probably one in your backyard and you just don't know about it. There are a couple here in the Chicago area. And we have SQL Saturday. So for many of you who are coming to PASS Summit, SQL Saturday was probably your first engagement with PASS, and you heard someone like myself say, hey, you should really consider coming to PASS Summit. It's like SQL Saturday, only for 3 days. So SQL Saturday, free one-day local training events. Did I mention it's free? There's normally a small fee for lunch. But you get to hear really great speakers like you hear here at Summit in SQL Saturday. Important for this year, but in every year, this has gone on for a couple of years now, PASS Marathon and the PASS virtual groups. So if you are looking to concentrate your training, 24 hours of really in-depth talks on a specific subject, PASS Marathon is for you. The virtual groups, these are online special targeted interest groups. If you don't have a local group, they're excellent. If you do, it's a chance to get involved with people from across the country, across the world, and hear more targeted training and talks. Lastly, without volunteers, PASS would not be able to do what we do. All of the speakers, the board members, everyone who runs SQL Saturdays, the local groups, we are all volunteers. And I would encourage you to also get involved. Volunteering for PASS can be an incredibly rewarding thing, and it helps out the community, right? So give something back to your community. Session evaluation. Your feedback is really important to me and every other speaker. So please visit the session evaluation link in the left-hand side navigation bar to rate this session and every session you've attended. In addition to being able to win some fantastic prizes, you'll have the opportunity to help speakers like myself improve, understand what we're doing well, understand what we're not doing well, and for a lot of us for whom we didn't do a lot of these types of video or online sessions before, the feedback helps. It really helps. Earlier this summer, I was speaking at SQL Saturday LA, and my mic just was killing people, and so I switched. This was great. This is feedback that I got. And previous feedback has been like, hey, this part of your session wasn't as strong, so I was able to address that. Or like, hey, you went down this rabbit hole. So please fill out the session evaluations. They're so helpful. All right, as I mentioned, I am Dan Mallott. I started out life in IT as a DBA, and then depending on your perspective, I either went to the dark side or got better. I became a developer. My focus is on high performance data solutions. So getting data out of your database and into your consumers' hands as fast as it can, whether that consumer is a person, another computer, or some sort of data processing. And then in my spare time, I can be found as an ice hockey official at the rink. So that's calling penalties, calling offsides, and causing your team to lose the game. So I do a fair amount of that here in Illinois. All right, let's jump in. So we have a lot to talk through here. This is a fraught topic. To do a quick introduction, we'll talk through common problems that we have with ORMs, talk through mitigation strategies. We'll look at how we can use stored procedures to help with this. There is a way. We'll talk about Dapper. So for those of you who don't know what Dapper is, stay tuned. And then we'll try to leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions. So we got 75 minutes. Try to talk for 60 of that, and we'll take 15 minutes for questions at the end. If you have something really burning, please drop it in the chat, and we'll try to address it as we go. Okay, first off, what is an ORM? It's not a four-letter word, but it is something that we all have to deal with if we have an application running. So object relational mapping, ORM, in computer science is a programming technique for converting data between incompatible type systems using object-oriented programming languages. This creates, in effect, a virtual object database that can be used from within the programming language. So at a minimum, ORMs should provide a method of mapping query results into object graphs. So that's that type mismatch. In the database, we have a relational model. In our application, we have an object graph, and those are different things. So why do we use ORMs? That's kind of important to start there. As we mentioned, it helps address the imbalance between relational and object models. This is something that we've been able to write code to do for ages, but doing it in an automated fashion is quite nice. They usually provide automated mapping for queries. This is sort of the minimum bar for an ORM. Some of them provide the ability to generate SQL on the fly, so no need to write SQL. We'll dive into the implications of that. Some provide the ability to specify the shape of the database in code. You might hear the term code first. We'll also dive into the implications of that. If you've heard me talk before, you know I'm not a fan of that. And many developers view this as speeding development, that they're able to develop features and applications more quickly. And this is an arguable point. This is something that, like, there's some merit to it, and there's some some like, well, you're kind of hand waving away some kind of important details to it as well. All right, before we go any further, there are some caveats that I want to share. This is software engineering. There are no silver bullets or magic solutions. If there are, or if somebody's trying to tell you there are, try to figure out what they're trying to sell you. And it's probably database tuning advice. ORMs are a valuable tool for certain problems. This is, I think, sometimes a controversial statement in the SQL Server community. We've had NHibernate and Entity Framework doing terrible things to our database for far too long, or LLVLGen, or some of these other ones. That doesn't change that it's still a valuable tool. I'm not going to bash any one group more than another. Developers, DBAs, ultimately we want the same thing. We want the success of the project, the application, the customer, the client, our company, right? That's how we continue to get paid, in theory. We want success. We want the same thing. And then none of this is wholly right or wrong. This is a legitimately gray area of software development. There is no one way to do this correctly. I know I'm probably losing some of you, but that's the truth. We don't have this is the way. This isn't the Mandalorian here. All right, ORMs, they suck. Literally everyone. Certainly, I think sometimes database professionals, we don't think that the developers are aware. Trust me, we're aware. All right. Yeah, just some comparisons here. So code first migrations never. So the left side is the developer, the right side is our database professional friends. Code first migrations never work. Yeah, they're actually a pain to work with from a developer standpoint. Funny, they result in terrible data models. Oh man, our DBAs really hate ORMs. Why do the developers insist on using them? They can be difficult to unit test, and it can give the impression that the developers aren't actually doing any testing. Not really going to touch on that a whole lot. Sometimes ORMs make you write extra code that you would rather not. And that's interesting because there's the trade-off of they make the DBAs do extra maintenance sometimes too, right? Like, I really need this index rebuilt all the time because my ORM isn't doing what it's supposed to. And then there's this idea that they're slow, which has some merit to it. ORMs like Entity Framework Core do a lot under the hood. And yeah, there's a cost to that. Convenience, hidden code brings costs. That's not a surprising thing. So we've all seen things like this. This particular code sample comes from our old friend Entity Framework. So that'd be Entity Framework 6. Whatever we're on now. And this doesn't, like, if you actually read the query and you get rid of all the square brackets, like, this isn't terrible. Not really sure why we needed to alias the table as extent1. Like, what is extent1 anyway? But yeah, this isn't awful. I'm not sure why we're aliasing all the columns, but you know, there's probably some reasons. So what are those reasons? Why do we get things that look like that? And that one wasn't even all that bad. So the reality is that auto-generating code that works every time is actually a really hard problem. So ORMs like Entity Framework Core, and Hibernate that generate their own SQL have what are called generation strategies. And these strategies exist to ensure the SQL will execute no matter what sort of convoluted code is passed in, particularly in the case of something like a link to X scenario. The goal of generated SQL is to execute successfully. We aren't particularly concerned about performance because we want to make sure that it executes. And you know, this is kind of figures, it's a reality. SQL generation doesn't take advantage of the latest features, or even features that we've had since 2008, just because we want to ensure broad compatibility. So less version-specific branching in the code leads to more reliable code, right? So we aren't trying to take advantage of, like, say, windowing functions that weren't available in SQL Server 2005 because we have ORMs that still have to work against SQL Server 2005. Now, why do you ask? Why? Well, because Microsoft has this thing about backwards compatibility, and so does everyone else. And if you look at the survey results that we have every year for like what databases are out there, there are a surprising number of SQL Server 2000, 2005, 2008, 2008 R2s still running out there. And I'm guessing you hope that they don't break because they're out of LTS. All right. The other side of the bad SQL that an ORM emits is that sometimes the developer does something that makes the ORM work even harder. So I have a personal story with this. We were developing an application that did a lot of data processing, and I wrote something in LINQ that I thought would result in essentially star from table where IDs in, and then this giant list of IDs. And what I actually got was not that. I got something that looked awfully chevron shaped or arrow shaped, and it performed like last week's dinner. And it turned out that I had inverted some logic somewhere along the way, and once I fixed that, well, wouldn't you know, not only did the performance get better, but the SQL looked a lot better as well. A couple other things to think about there. ORMs usually depend on the consumer to handle unit of work scenarios, so transactions. In software engineering, we call that a unit of work. A transaction in SQL is a unit of work. Languages like C# can help with this, but they don't do all the work. And so incorrect implementation might result in more statements issued against the database than needed to reset the data to a good state. So if you don't if you aren't smart about your unit of work, sometimes you end up having to issue rollback queries, which, right, that's not good because now your database is in an indeterminate state potentially if the application crashes. ORMs also depend on the consumer, the developer, to make sure all the data is loaded when it's needed. So what the result can be is what's called the n+1 query problem. Say we've got an orders table, and each order can have one-to-many order lines. Now we're going to loop through all the orders that we have in the database based on some criteria and sum up the order lines and then update that order. So I get all my orders and I start looping through them. And each time I loop through them, I access all the order lines. Now, depending on the behavior that you've set up by default with your ORM and the way you've written things, the order lines may have already been pulled back, or you might have to go to the database and get them every time you go through the loop. This is where you get the n+1 query problem. You have n orders, so n queries for order lines, plus 1, the initial query. That's bad. We've all seen this happen. Tools will even try to help you with this. All right, so how do we mitigate this? Because mitigation is really we're not going to solve all of the problems, but we can help them. First strategy, and this is true no matter what type of application that you're working with, but you have to pay attention to database design. Proper database design can be done only once. So do it right the first time. Once you've got tables and data, it gets a lot harder. And the reality is poor database design is going to result in poor query performance no matter how you're accessing it, right? You're always going to be fighting the original design if you did it poorly, right? If you have to have 40 joins, right? Joins are not the end of the world, but 40 of them certainly isn't ideal. This is something that NoSQL really does well, and we would be, it'd be good for us to do it as well. Design for your application's access patterns. So discard true relational patterns when it makes sense. So that is denormalization, that is creating views, that is potentially duplicating data, using second normal form, if it makes sense. And along the same lines, but in the other direction, don't fall into an entity per table trap. So this is the part of code first that's really bad, which I'll talk a little bit more in a second. Code first says, oh, I've got a order class and an order lines class and an order line detail class. And so all of those things become tables, and maybe they shouldn't, right? Maybe one table can map to two entities, maybe maybe two tables can map to a single entity, right? We're using the ORM to solve the imbalance between a relational and an object graph. So why are we creating an object graph as our relational model? And lastly, code first, great for initial acceleration of development. I just need to prototype out a database and we're good to go. But ultimately, you're going to end up with some really poor design choices, and that's going to be really hard to unwind later. I've seen that quite a few times. Okay. Second strategy. I don't know how many of you came to my session earlier in this week about using the right tool for the right job. This is not about how you're getting the data out. This is about using proper storage. Almost everybody has applications that call for storing unstructured data or data that doesn't have a nice, easy niche to fit into SQL Server. Consider not storing that in SQL Server. I know there are JSON features, there are XML features. You can store semi-structured, unstructured data. It's just hard to query efficiently. And then please, for the love of your database, do not store images, PDFs, files. Hey, SharePoint, I'm looking at you. These don't belong in the database. They belong on a file server. They belong in, if you're all in Azure, there's no reason why you're not using SQL Azure and Cosmos and blob storage and all of these things that, you can be targeted about how you use them. So you're using the best tool for the job, right? It's the same as like when you see someone running Service Broker and you ask them, well, don't you have other options? Okay, third, log your SQL, log your commands. Many ORMs, including the most popular ones, log the generated ORM and other statistics. So time of execution, query execution time, the actual SQL statement. This is really important. And you can send this log to either the diagnostic trace or to actual log files. You can send it anywhere that you send your other logs. During development, you want to make sure you are reviewing this SQL regularly. You might even want to turn on things like log sensitive data so that you can see all of the parameters. You want to do that so you can see problems early, right? You don't want to get to the end of the day and go, oh, well, we've got some problems and I'm not entirely sure where, so let me run up an extended event session or a profiler session, right? Log and review, log and review. And it's really easy to do, which we're going to take a look at. So we'll pop over to our logging demo. And we're going to start out in, actually in our entity framework. So we'll look at our orders repository and how easy this is. Make it a little bigger for you. So this is really easy because all you have to do. So I've got my logger is just hanging out here, right? So this is I'm just logging to a text writer, right? Logging out to the diagnostics trace. Here I'm getting my serial log one, right? But we all you have to do is attach this delegate to database.log. This is entity framework, by the way. And we get some really nice output. So we'll run this real quick. Yeah, and you see similar output to what we had on the screen because I took the same screenshot, right? So this is really nice. We get our SQL, when it executed, how long it executed. It tells us it brought back a SQL data reader. Okay, well, that's great. Connection closed. So like if you have connection issue problems, you can see like, okay, well, this connection was open for about a second. And then if we look at Entity Framework Core, this is a little more complicated to set up. We have to use our dependency injection, which I can talk through, but we essentially pass a logger factory in, and then when we're configuring, we pass that in to use that. But then we get some really good output as well. In this case, we'll get it colorized, which would be kind of cool. Yeah, there we go. So you'll notice I turned on sensitive data logging because this is a demo. You get a nice warning in your log about that. All right, so initialize the context, so I get some information. Yep, no tracking. I've got detailed errors, right? And then I get my query. What was executed. Now there's some things here. So 263 milliseconds, right? There's some other things that I may need to log outside of just the query, or might want to log. But see, this was really easy. So it's something that your developers should be doing. All right, easy, right? So I know that many of you have been sitting here asking, well, what about stored procedures? When is he going to talk about stored procedures? If our developers would just use stored procedures, this would all be better. It's not totally true, but your ORM does actually support stored procedures, no matter what your developers have told you. In this case, this is for entity framework. This example, but most ORMs give you the facility to handle stored procedures and map the results to the object. So you can pass in a stored procedure, you still get your objects. It's nice. You do lose some of the other things that ORMs might do, where you can just update your objects and persist them back, and you don't have to think about it. But ultimately, like this is fairly simple, right? All right. Well, this starts to involve more code when you get into parameters, but there's SQL injection protection, so that's good, great. The big problem, small problem, how many stored procedures do you want in your database? If that's not an issue, who's going to write them? Who's going to maintain them? You know, because now you start having like a stored procedure for every individual query, every filter combination, right? That starts to get out of control real fast. Dynamic SQL can rescue us. So we can utilize dynamic SQL coupled with SP execute SQL to create more flexible stored procedures. The query plan is still cached, which we'll look at that in a minute. You get full control over what is essentially generated SQL. So you minimize parameter sniffing issues. There's no implicit conversion unless you absolutely want it. And it's a pattern that's easy to extend without breaking existing code. So, you know, if you have a stored procedure that's returning stuff, you can just add parameters to it, right? And I'll walk through how all this works in a second, but this is actually really easy. So let's take a look at this. And we'll take a look at this in our old friend, or our new friend, Azure Data Studio. So the first thing we're going to look at is a stored procedure that handles multiple parameters, but they're all optional, and so it's very flexible and useful. So DBO search cities with state, violating my own rule of putting everything in DBO. City name null, state name null. So we start, I set my basic SQL. So this is, I'm getting everything from the cities table as C. And then I'm going to create a where parameters table that simply allows me to dynamically build some parameters, a parameters list. So if city name is null, I insert city name into my where parameters table. If state name is not null, do the same thing. Oh, but this one I have to actually add a join, so I'm going to add the join to my SQL, right? And you might, you know, depending on how complicated this is, you might want to, you know, take the joins separately. All right, now if I had any where parameters, I'm going to build myself a where clause using our old friend coalesce and some clever string manipulation. Declare my parameters list, so at city name, at state name. Now it's really important to know that SP execute SQL, if you pass it parameters that aren't present in the query itself, it doesn't care. It maps the parameters that you have in the query to parameters in the list. They all the ones in the query have to be present in the list, but all the ones in the list don't have to be present in the query. So this creates a really flexible situation. And then I just pass in my other parameters. And so this has to be in the same list as our parameters string, but they can be null again. And because we're using SP execute SQL, we get some things that are very nice, like, well, for example, SQL injection protection. All of these parameters are parsed, so we aren't gonna like all of a sudden have Bobby tables going on. All right, so this is how the stored procedure works. Let's take a look at how this works in terms of plan reuse. All right, so first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna clear cached plans because I'm sure I have some. And then run a quick query to prove that I have none. All right, so we're gonna use search cities with state, which is kind of like our search, which is the one we were just looking at. And I'm gonna search for just a city. this works first. All right. Okay, so results. There are a few places with cities named Atlanta. Cool. Now, we're going to jump in and view our cached plans, and we're going to see two. So we have the procedure itself, stored proc itself, and then we have our prepared query, which is actually our dynamic SQL. Okay, great. With me so far, one query, one plan. Now, what happens if I do search cities with state against Chicago? Well, there's only one city named Chicago in the United States because it's a really great place. Okay, but what did that do to our cached plans? Oh, interesting. I have still only two. Oh, now I've got two use counts. So we've got plan reuse. This is great because I've just called the same stored procedure, two different values. I've got plan reuse. All right, now what happens if I add state name? What do we think is going to happen? Well, let's take a look. All right, well, first of all, there's only one Atlanta in Georgia, and thankfully there is one Atlanta in Georgia. So what do we get from there? Oh, okay. So my stored proc has 3 use counts. I still have my just state version, or just city version. And now I've got one for my city and state combo. So we'll see plan reuse, great. For this method, we will end up with multiple plans for this dynamic SQL for each combination of parameters that we use. So if we had 3 parameters, we would end up with potentially 3 plans, or potentially a few more, depending on the combination of parameters that you used. So, you know, there's less bloat here in any case. All right. One more thing here. What if you changed your ORM? So we have the concept of a MicroORM. This only provides a thin wrapper around data access, and it usually forgoes all but even the most basic SQL generation. So maybe it does very basic SQL generation, maybe not. But the goal is to provide object relational mapping functionality without everything else around it, right? So this is really as close to bare metal ADO.NET data access as you can get. And probably the best MicroORM that exists in the .NET world is Dapper. So Dapper was originally developed for use in the Stack Exchange family of sites. So that's the resource that we couldn't do our jobs without, right? So Stack Overflow, DBA Stack Exchange, all of those. Super user. It is open sourced, so the GitHub link is on the screen there. The primary goal of Dapper is to provide extremely fast performance across a variety of relational database management systems, including, of course, SQL Server. As you may know, Stack Exchange runs on SQL Server. And so to achieve this, Dapper provides a set of extension methods on IDB connections. So this is the base ADO.NET connection interface in C# that all the other ones inherit from. So a SQL connection is a DB connection. Cosmos connection is a DB connection. And it essentially allows querying and mapping. There's also a subproject that provides basic CRUD methods. So get one, retrieve one, create one, update one, delete one. But primarily, you're expected to bring your own SQL to the party. That's one of the things that makes this really, really powerful. So why should you use it? Well, because outside of the CRUD extensions, you get full control over all of your SQL. It provides excellent performance. It is faster than every other data access method outside of doing it yourself, and maybe not even then. So the folks who caretake Dapper have posted up tests that show that it is miles faster than using something like Entity Framework or Entity Framework Core. There's a really easy way to provide parameters. It leverages what are called anonymous types in C# and it does that very well. Because of its extension of IDB connection, it supports almost anything because, as I mentioned, almost everything inherits from that. You get automated mapping of query results to object graphs, and it's actually pretty smart at that. And you do get control over ANSI or Unicode strings. I don't have a demo for that, but you're not stuck with, so if you noticed, Entity Framework was terrible for this, but Entity Framework and Entity Framework Core tend to prefer Unicode strings and varchar over ANSI strings, which, you know, when you get parameter sniffing issues, that can be a problem. So let's take a look at Dapper in action. We'll make this a little bigger. Please, nobody steal the password to my Docker container. So as we've just seen, we have a really nice way of expressing ourselves here. This is a really simple way to go. So we go ahead and run this, and we'll get our city. We have 5 cities retrieved, and then we had the get city with ID 1. So Aaronsburg happens to be the first city in the database. So this was really easy, really simple. It's a really nice thing to do, a really nice thing to use. I would encourage you to take it back to your developers and have them look into it. There is more work for them, so do be sensitive to that. But it's so very fast, so very, very fast. All right, got some links for you here. So that is Entity Framework, Entity Framework Core, Dapper, our demo code, all those things sort of covered there. And what questions do you have? Yeah, let's talk through some stuff. I'm in the chat. The live Q&A. Happy to answer everything that you have. Questions about this talk. I can talk about ORMs or dynamic SQL or anything like that for hours. Lastly, quick reminder, session evaluation, really important. Please, please, please fill it out. And thank you. I am Dan Mallott. That's my Twitter. That's the best way to get a hold of me. If you want to email me, please feel free to email me. As a reminder, totally willing to talk about West Monroe, just outside of this context. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the live question and answer.